a human being in an economic model is only interested in money would never work if they're not compensated and controlled, and is perfectly rational. And I think that kind of shapes a little bit how we think about what motivates people. People are only motivated because of a paycheck. Money obviously is important, but the economic model just has that. And if I don't control you, you're going to shirk, you're never going to do your work. And I think that's the myth. They're motivated by many more things than those more monetary aspects of work. And that's the shift we have to go through. And for a lot of HR leaders, that might be second nature. They might be aware of that already, but many leaders are not.
Stephan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Chris.
First New York, now London.
Yeah, exactly. So within a month or so.
I don't even know.
Exactly. Feels like today, actually, but it's great.
So let's not pretend that you're in London to see me. You're in London for the football.
No, I'm actually here for you, but I happen to manage to tag a football game.
Couple.
Yeah, actually two. Yeah. That's right.
Tell everyone who you're supporting so they can get upset.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to Anfield on Sunday.
Nice.
So I'm really supporting Liverpool.
Yeah.
And yesterday I've been to an Arsenal game.
Amazing.
To see that our competition is not winning, and they didn't. So good.
So basically, you're winning the league.
I very much hope so. I mean, we will win the league. I hope so that we're going to win it when I'm there.
And you get to see it.
And I'm going to see it. Now, it's true that last time they won in 2019 and 2020, I was also at a game.
Really?
At Anfield at the beginning of so now I'm at the game as well. So my son and I think that maybe it's us.
All you.
Is like a causal. We actually causally lead
Are you tracking
to Liverpool to win the league. So I hope they're going to invite us back to make sure that they win again.
Yeah.
When we're there physically.
We'll do a LinkedIn post about it.
Exactly.
Tag in Arsenal on LinkedIn. Let them know. That's incredible. How does it feel to have that experience with your son?
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, that's the most important part. We spend time with him. So we're spending obviously some time here in London. Then on Saturday we go to Liverpool, spend a couple of days there. Cool. And we're doing that on a regular basis. So I'm often traveling with him. We do a lot of football tourism. Been to many other games.
It's a good excuse.
It's a good excuse, yeah. I mean, I'm a football fan. I'm not as obsessed as he is, but seeing your kid, happy. I mean, he actually got the game for Christmas as a gift, and already there. As a Christmas gift, he got the tickets.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So I often give him an experience as a gift. So that's one, but he had others.
I think it's so much more impactful, right? The experience and the memories that you build together, as opposed to a gift.
I completely agree. And as a dad yourself, it's just so valuable and priceless to spend time with them.
Yeah.
And, they grow up.
That's
so
the one
fast.
thing we don't get back.
Yeah, he's 15. It feels like he was very, very little yesterday.
Yeah.
And now he's a teenager, and soon he's gonna be gone.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not going to be gone, but he's not this little guy.
He's not going to want. How much longer have you got where he wants to spend time with Dad?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Dad, leave me alone now.
As long as I pay for football tickets, I think he's still going to tag along.
He's going to be around. Before we go any further, tell everyone a little bit more about your background and sort of the journey to where we are now.
Yeah, so I'm an economist by training, so I'm a behavioral economist. And after my PhD, I worked at the Federal Reserve Bank for a couple of years. They had a center for behavioral economics and decision making, and there I really got interested in evidence-based policymaking. So how can we create evidence that support leaders, policymakers? And then I moved to Columbia Business School, became a professor there, where I teach both strategy and an elective on the future of work. So I kind of now think about combining kind of my strategy work with thinking about what motivates people, and now more recently about kind of how technology interacts with that. So like,
wow,
strategy, behavioral economics, and the future of work, kind of in that all those three together.
The tripod.
Yeah, exactly.
That's super interesting because you're kind of looking at it from different lenses. The behavioral side.
And I have to be honest, for the longest time, I would go into my classroom and teach strategy, and it was all about customers. How to position ourselves. What should Walmart do? Should they go upscale or not? Should PepsiCo split up their snack business or do snacks and beverages together? What should Disney do? Should they do streaming or not? And it was all about the customers. And then I went go back to my office and think about like what motivates people, like how does work look like? And I keep them separate for the longest time until I maybe way too late kind of saw the connection between like, we obviously know like people are important in the success of organization, and the people are not just customers, and they're actually the employees. And so that's how I made the connection then.
It's interesting, like, most people don't think about it that way, because like without the people there is no product, there is no customers, there is none of that, right? But we don't look at it through that lens.
Absolutely. And I would do with executives when I teach strategy, I would like segmentation exercises. Think about your core customers. How do we segment the customers? What do they care about? What are the important attributes? How you compare to your competitors and whatever. And only recently then I saw like, well, we should do the same for our employees. How to think about our segments. What's the employee segment?
Yeah.
What do they care about from like most to least important? How do we think about trade-offs there? Because with customers we do, like when you're Walmart, think like, well, the product offerings, rural convenience, whatever, really important, value, ambiance, sales, not so important. Then they make those trade-offs. Like, well, as I tell my students, you have to be terrible at certain things to be great at others. So you have to be at Walmart, you have to be bad at everything, and that's fine, because that allows you then to be good.
And focus in on more.
Yeah, and we're not doing that as much with the employees. Think about what segments, what employees do we want? Like, what's the experience? Where do we make compromises on the experience, and where do we really want to excel?
Yeah.
And that's like much more recently where I think about, what can we learn from customer-centricity for employee-centricity? What are the tools? How do we need to change?
Yeah.
How we manage people when we have this lens of like, think about as a product or as a customer, and then just exchange customer with employees.
And I think that's what most businesses and HR functions are on a similar journey, right? They're like, we've been doing this with our customers. Why have we not been doing this? We go the extra mile, right? To have the data, to create the customer experience. We've designed the tools to know, like if I look at my Amazon, right, to make recommendations, it knows my Amazon knows more about my buying than me. Right?
Absolutely.
And what I want, right? But we haven't done that internally.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the same people. It's the same people who experience when they go to Amazon or Netflix. It's like, oh, it's personalized. What I do. And then they go to the office, and it's kind of one size fits all. And not so surprisingly, we're a little frustrated with that, because we experienced all those personalization. And obviously younger generations even more so. Like my kids do not know that there was a world where there was not one day shipping. They're like,
that's so true,
dude. Like it comes
used to wait 2-3 weeks,
like 3 days. Like, well, like I can't. And it's like, there was a time where we waited like 2 weeks, a month. It was perfectly normal. Yeah. Not anymore. So I think that then changes obviously the preferences and the expectations of the workforce, because they're used to something very different when they're customers, and when they come into the workforce, they rightly so, expect kind of the same personalization.
It's no longer a nice to have. Even I was speaking to a CHRO recently who just started in a new company, and she said to me, like, her first day, she needed some extra hardware and some stationary stuff, right? Spoke to the team. They're like, oh, we spoke to procurement, we'll have it in 3 weeks. So she's like, got up, I walked across the road, bought what I needed, walked back upstairs, and she's like, just think about that. How crazy is that as an experience, right?
Absolutely.
That you're used to ordering on Amazon, getting next day, but as a executive in a multi-billion-dollar company, I have to wait weeks because we have procurement that needs to sign it off, and then needs to get. It's just, she's like, it's just, and obviously part of her role as CHRO is obviously looking at the employee experience. She's just like, what a terrible experience that was for me.
Oh yeah.
And also, like, then I spent another couple of hours trying to figure out how to get on the Wi-Fi. Right, so all of these,
exactly. All those frustrations were like those pain points on the customer side. They worked so hard to make sure that those pain points are not there. And we're not doing it as much for our employees. And I think that needs to change, because as you said, it's not just a nice to have, it's almost a must to have now, because everybody expects it.
Yeah. Was this the inspiration behind your book, The Employee Advantage?
That was very much the motivation for the book, The Employee Advantage, which, like, already, the name, actually very few people get it. It has kind of two meaning. One is kind of the employee has more of an advantage, so they're getting more power. And the other is, like, treating your employees nicely gives you a competitive advantage. But in order to do that, you need to think strategy. You need to think trade-offs, as we do when we think about the customer as well. So that like motivated me then to write it, and gave me also the passion to go through the long process of, like, writing the book, and which is. So
you didn't have a ghostwriter? It was actually you.
I did not have a ghostwriter. Now in retrospect, I maybe wish I had one, but, like, no, I actually wrote the book.
I only found out recently that, like, 90% of my guests who are authors didn't actually write their books. So I'm like, because it's almost becoming like the few. So you did. I actually did write the book. Now, in fairness, part of my job is to write.
I would expect. I'm not running a multi-billion-dollar organization so on the side and, like, write. My main job is more the other way around.
I do love the how putting workers first help business thrive. Like, that part really kind of brings to life what you just said, in terms of, like, it's not just a nice to have, it's actually great for business.
Yeah, I think that's the necessary part. Like, if it's just nice to have, or, like, it's the right thing to do, it will never get the buy-in it actually needs. But it is actually the way to success, to really create a competitive advantage by thinking very carefully about, like, what's the employee what's the employee experience, having everything around that, and then you get, higher productivity, you get much more innovation, turnover goes down, and if the employees have contact to the customer, actually the customer experience is also better. So there are a lot of benefit for the organization, even if you don't really care about your employees. You have to do it in order to be ahead of the game.
When you were doing the research, what was the most sort of compelling data or case study that really brings that to life?
I mean, it's empirically, obviously, it's not so easy to do, because, the successful organizations are also most likely the ones who treat their employees better. Causality is a little unclear, and there's kind of a chicken and the egg. But there are a lot of, like, really good evidence that looks at, some sort of well-being or, like, engagement factors in the organization, and then correlate it to hard facts, like, profits, the return on asset, and there is a compelling evidence that on average that's just the right thing to do. Now, of course, you have to do it right. Like, just treating your employees nice and having a terrible business model, that's not going to get you anywhere. Like, it has to be a good strategy combined with you taking really care of your employees to get like engagement, productivity, and innovation up.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned well-being, because that's also something that in the past has been seen as sort of the nice
What,
to have. Well-being.
Oh, well-being, yeah.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Whereas now we're seeing a lot of data and research coming out.
Yeah,
very
exactly. Well-being is important now. What I call in the book ping pong table solutions.
Not that type of well-being. Yeah.
And so, well, because we think like, does a free yoga class, or like a membership to a gym, does that help? I mean, I don't think it hurts, but that's, to me, more like a ping pong table solution, where, what really creates well-being is like if you get rid of toxic behavior, culture, if you really make sure that there is work-life balance, and just putting a yoga class or a breathing room or a nap pot into your office, that's not going to do it.
It's because you could have all of those things and still have a toxic
workplace. Exactly. I mean, and we know, there's
it's a combination of
famous companies, like those gaming companies,
spending millions,
have like the most amazing offices and all those
no one's even there now,
perks, and it's still terrible to work. Yeah. Very few people leave because there is no free yoga class. They leave.
It's when you have both when it gets really exciting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you have that psychological safety, you feel like you're in a place where you can belong, and then you have all of those things.
Yeah.
Then
and what is also, I mean, that's now where strategy kicks in. Let's say the ping pong table solutions would be the kicker. Like if you have a kombucha tap, everybody is happy. Now, of course, everybody then gets a kombucha tap. There is no differentiation. Everybody has a ping pong, but obviously it's the combination, as you said, that is hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
But hard is good. Hard is actually good in strategy, because now you can differentiate. If you do the hard work and you invest, you can really beat the competition.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned the ping pong table. For people that can't see behind the cameras, under our staircase we have a ping pong table, and people always mention it. And I've had that ping pong table even when I was in my previous company. And it was less around the ping pong table that we worked in a very high stress sales environment. And when I could see the team getting a bit overwhelmed, I'd say, okay, everyone just stand up. Let's go for a walk around the block. Let's play some table tennis.
Yeah.
And it would just kind of reset everyone. And so it was less around like the fact of having a table tennis table, is more about like building relationships with the team, getting them out of their headspace, because it was a very stressful sales environment. And that was that I can definitely see from a well-being perspective that really helped, but it was because of the way we did it.
Yeah.
And the way it was that I could physically as a manager see the team being overwhelmed, and that was just one of the outlets that we used.
Absolutely. I mean, that I completely agree, Chris. We know from research that this relatedness, I actually call it working together works, how this team spirit and having those interactions is super powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you create that by playing ping pong or doing walks or like having moments where people can really connect on a personal level, is obviously very powerful. But you need to do the hard work to create those moments.
Yeah, it doesn't just happen.
Putting it in there and hoping that it's going to happen is not going to work.
No.
And often a lot of leaders think as this checkbox as like, oh, I have a ping pong table, I should be good. And I have a kombucha tap. So I'm sure people have like amazing moments at that kombucha tap. And that's just not enough. You have to do what you said, kind of doing the hard work to being very intentional about those.
You literally just took the word out of my mouth. I'm very intentional about it. Even things like people listening on the show probably heard this a million times, but once a month everyone in the team would bring in food that represents their heritage and their culture, and would have a big meal together. And every single month we did that, and it was everyone was so excited.
Yeah.
And it would kind of, if you were new in the business, it was an amazing way for you to get to know everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And it's something so small, but it made such a massive difference.
Absolutely.
It's
interesting, like during the pandemic, when we were suddenly on Zoom, and suddenly you saw like people's life in the background. And I was like, oh, Chris, you have a cat. I don't know whether you have a cat, but like, oh, there is a cat. Like, oh, you have a kid. Like, oh, that's an interesting piece of art. So why do you have that piece of art? And suddenly part of the life, I mean, I don't think we need to bring like our whole life to work. I mean, it's also okay to have like a life outside of work. But there is a very important moment when you get to know people on a more personal level. I think that creates that social, that bond.
Yeah, that and it's interesting, right? Because there were people that you perhaps could have worked with for 5 years that you never knew that you never knew any of that about, right? Because everyone kept things separate, work life and home. That all of a sudden you had these things like that you could relate to, that brought you closer together. Like, oh, I had no idea you had 2 kids. I had no idea. I love dogs. I've got
exactly.
Right? So like, or the art thing, right? So
they're like some of the, where you like figure out, oh, they have like a hobby. They're like amazing photographers. Who like travel around the world and take like those amazing pictures, or like do art themselves. Where you're like, wow, that's a side of you I've never thought.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I like many others was in a workplace where you were told, even as a director actually, by my boss, that you separate those things.
Yeah.
And I used to get a lot of feedback from my boss saying, Chris, they're not your friends. You shouldn't be spending time going to, I used to work out with a few of my employees and train and like do things outside the office, and I'd get like, pulled up on that, which is insane if you think about it. I'm spending most of my life with these individuals and you're telling me not to build meaningful relationships with them. So it was, that's the old way of working, right? I'm the boss, you're the employee, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I want to get to know people.
Yeah. And I think it becomes, and that's part of also what I mean with like, the employees become the new customers, in terms of the way we work. Obviously changes. It's much more less command and control, and much more like teamwork. And it's possible that like 50 years ago, if I'm the boss, I tell you what to do, and that's the way of
that was
working.
Part of like the sort of industrial revolution where you needed command and control. You go and do this, and that's kind of how.
And maybe it worked then.
It did clearly,
but it definitely doesn't work anymore.
No.
Where like everything is teamwork, collaboration, and everybody should know, like, we just collaborate better if we know each other, if we meet each other, if we have those more personal connections than just like, this is my task, this is yours.
Yeah, you'll go above and beyond for that person, and if you kind of know that.
That's right.
You have understanding of, okay, they may be at home right now because they've got a sick child, or there's some people will step up, right, if they really kind of. And also, they will forgive if they can see, Chris is having a bad day. He's not in a good mood. They'll kind of understand and have more empathy if they know more about you, as opposed to Chris is just being a dick today.
Yeah. Right. And I often also think about, we talked about personalization before, and part of it is like technology that helps personalizing. There is also an old school way of personalizing, which is like talking to somebody one-on-one. Figuring out, what does Chris care about? What is he as a person? And that allows me then, as a team member or a leader, to personalize my experience or your experience, my approach to you, because I should talk to you very differently than your team member, because they are different. And I think it's very important to have those interactions to personalize.
It doesn't always have to be so complicated, and there's this sort of temptation that I see with companies and leaders, and to sort of constantly try and reinvent the wheel. Like, you don't always need to do that. Like, one of the simplest things I used to do when I was a leader in that sales organization is when I first brought on an employee, is understand like what their personal goals were in life, whether it's buying a house, whether it's saving up to get married, or whatever it may be. And we took it to the extreme on my team, where we had the entire wall was every one of our employees' vision boards.
Oh yeah.
So not only did I know, but the whole entire team know that this person was working towards, and they had a photo of a house, right? Or this person had a photo of a really amazing holiday destination they've been saving up for. And we could all collectively see what everyone was working towards. And that alone, to your point, created conversations, connection points, and we all wanted to help each other win, because I knew that AJ's a few deals away from being able to go to that holiday. So I want to help him win, right?
Right.
Rather than creating that sales environment where we're all against each other as well. And that seems like a very small thing, but I could tell you every single employee exactly what motivates them and what they're excited about.
That's right.
And it makes your conversations a lot more exciting rather than, hey, here's this is how many deals you got to get and this is how far away. Like, it's like, actually,
that's right.
This is how far we are away from you buying a house. It's a lot more inspiring.
Yeah, I love that idea.
You know?
Yeah. But it also requires kind of that people take time to understand, if you're a leader, to talk to people, to have those one-on-one.
Yeah.
And really try to understand, and customer-centric organizations, also try to systemize that, where like executives have to talk to customers, once a month, and the same has to be true when we talk about the experience within teams and organizations.
Yeah. In the book you mentioned, you talk about the myth of the rational worker. Could you explain that?
Well, so, I'm an economist by training, so economic theory, like a human being in an economic model is only interested in money, would never work if they're not compensated and controlled, and is perfectly rational. And I think that kind of shapes a little bit how we think about what motivates people, that people are only motivated because of a paycheck. Money obviously is important, but the economic model just has that. And if I don't control you, you're going to shirk, you're never going to do your work. And I think that's the myth that we have to think about. People are motivated by income is important, and we have to make sure that people are accountable for what they're doing, obviously. But they're motivated by many more things than those more monetary aspects of work, and that's the shift we have to go through. And for a lot of HR leaders, that might be second nature. They might be aware of that already, but many leaders are not. And you see it in discussions on, remote work. Where I talk to executives all the time when I teach about the future of work, and you often hear, well, if they're at home, they're shirk. They don't do anything.
After all we've gone through, they still have that mind.
They still do that.
Great, yeah.
And then there is funny interactions where one executive I talked to said, when they're at home, they go shopping. And so then I ask him, so what do you think they do when they're in the office? They also go shopping. There's no difference. Online shopping. That's what it's called. Or they're checked out.
There's no difference.
Yeah. I sometimes said it's quiet quitting. The old school quiet quitting is Microsoft Solitaire.
Oh, yeah, just sitting there.
You're just phoning it in just because you're physically there doesn't make you engaged.
But that's such a good point. Like if they're checked out at home, you can 100% guarantee they're checked out in the office. They're going to be less likely to be checked out at home because at least they have some type of balance, maybe. To be able to do that. So the idea that you think that because they're in the office they're going to be locked in,
absolutely, and the myth,
crazy.
The myth is still there. So that's at least what I gather in all those conversations I have with.
That's just sort of just back to the command and control.
Yeah, exactly. Then they think you have to control. You ask them, so what motivates your employees? And they all say they jump ship for another $10,000. Mm-hmm. And income is important, but people rarely really just switch for money.
There's been a lot of research recently. Well, first and foremost, everyone I've ever, in the last maybe year or two, anyone that I've interviewed here at HR Leaders and friends, colleagues and other founders, compensation's maybe been third on the list. It's around the flexibility. Number one is there flexibility. They're asking me, is it hybrid, 2 days in the office, 3? That's the first thing. So it's not compensation anymore. Secondly, it's around well-being, right? Which again was just something that never came up when I was a leader or a manager back in the day. It wasn't even a conversation, And then thirdly, it's compensation. That's kind of what I'm seeing. And there's been a lot of research recently where they interviewed, I can't remember who it was, but it was a couple of thousand executives and around, would you leave for the same amount of money to go to another company that does prioritize your well-being, and it was like 80 something percent.
Yeah.
So the exact same amount of money, like
Right, exactly.
And that was really, I mean, I'm happy to see that, but most people, if you probably said that a few years ago, they would be like, no way.
Yeah.
You know,
And it has to sink in, and like so that's also what I try to do in the book. Like, again, the parallel with customers. If you ask customers what they care about, price is obviously high up on that list somehow. But customer centricity is not lowering the price.
No.
It's like having the experience, and people in the customer space are now actually willing to accept that. We can, if I give you an amazing experience, I can actually increase the price. I can charge a premium. And the flip side, when we think about the employees, is as well, income might be there, but being employee-centric is improving the experience, and then you actually get more out of that. So actually the cost per unit might go down because they're more productive, they're less likely to leave, they're more innovative, as I mentioned before. And so I think that's the way we have to think about differently. And sometimes thinking about the customer, where we went to customer centricity and how that now affects how we think about employee centricity, I think is really important to also get buy-in from leaders who might not be there yet.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Amazon has done incredibly well. Like I always say to Shane, like the fact that I had a very expensive graphics card we bought for one of our editors. It was like £4,000, right? And we got scammed. It was like a fake Amazon account on Amazon.
Right.
So I called a customer success, and it's not sold by Amazon, so it's actually not their responsibility in terms of the refund. But they were like, "Yep, it's our fault. We're going to take responsibility for it." Sent me the refund immediately.
Yeah.
And I've had that many times, like with them in different scenarios where like pair of headphones are broken, etc. And like the level of customer success,
right.
the customer service is unreal.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can request a call and within seconds you get a phone call from someone at Amazon within seconds, and they're like, "How can we help you?"
Yeah.
That is unreal.
Exactly.
Like very few companies can say they have something.
And now we just have to apply that to internal.
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
So a quote that I like of Bezos that I have in the book is like where.
Oh, you have a quote from Bezos in the book. Okay.
Yeah, I have a bunch of books, but I mentioned Bezos. Amazon is not that particularly good when it comes to employees, but they're obviously very good when it comes to customers. And so he has many of those famous quotes, but one quote that I really like is like when he got asked about the customer, he said like, what is amazing about my customer, what is really cool? They're always dissatisfied. They're always unhappy with something. And what he meant with that, I can always learn to do better. I can always constantly improve. Now, there's very few leaders who would say, what is so great about my employees? They're always dissatisfied.
He's still seeing that through a positive lens.
Yeah,
he's just reframed it.
You have to think about like, if you want to innovate, if you actually want to excel at the employee experience, you need to be, first of all, as obsessed as Amazon is with the customers, and have mechanisms in place to actually deliver on that experience. And Amazon has that, they're dissatisfied, we're going to fix it. So there's this so Bezos has those question mark emails. I don't know whether you know about those. So he would read customer complaints personally. And then when one complaint comes in, when he thought like, well, that's raises above the bar that we have to do something, he just forwarded the email to one of his executives with a question mark.
With nothing else?
Nothing else. Not like deal with it or this is a problem. Just the question mark.
Oh my God.
And then that executives knew like, all hands on desk. We have to fix this right away.
I love that.
And that then leads to exactly what you said, to the experience and figuring out what are the pain points of the customers and dealing with that. And if we apply now the logic to the employees, it's the same. You mentioned before that executive who had, couldn't order X, Y, and Z or had to wait too long. I mean, that's obviously that's not a good experience. Mm-hmm. Somebody has to be there and like, let's fix this. That can't be true. That would not be true in Amazon when we think about customers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the parallel I want to draw between kind of how to think about the customer centricity and the employee centricity as a result.
Who owns this in the company?
That's a really good question. And I think we have to also learn kind of what the customer, you know, when you think about who owns the customer experience, it's not just one function. It's many things. You know, you have obviously the marketing department and the tech, the ops, everything has to work together. And I think if we think about how to improve the employee experience, we have to change. It's not just an HR thing. Everybody has to be involved. Because back to your example about like, you know, you want to order something, then it goes to procurement, and then it goes like whatever. Then somebody has to give green light, and then there's the technology aspect to it, and then the tech comes in. I mean, everybody has to be aligned in really delivering that experience, as we do with the customers.
One of the things that came up a few months, quite a while back, we had a session where we had about 20 like VPs, directors of employee experience, and it's a very new role, right? No,
right.
Only maybe in the last 5 years. And when I looked at the individuals and companies that were having a lot of success, one of the correlations that I found is those leaders who led employee experience, who had oversight of various functions, were more successful than others. So what I mean by that is there was one of the leaders who owned employee experience and had IT, operations, finance, HR. So employee experience was all of those domains. Because you're right, you could do it in operations, it could be great, but then now you have a technology. You have no interaction with the technology team, and that's, of course, the technology we use is going to impact our experience, right? So he said to me, when I took the job, I took it and said, I'm not taking this job unless I can oversee that across all of the core functions, because traditionally HR is trying to control it within the silo, and then they can't do anything about the technology experience, they can't do anything about the workplace experience, and it just becomes like the procurement experience.
Yeah, exactly.
As well. So it's like that was one of the key things that I saw, like those that are really having meaningful change kind of looked at it across the board. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, you have to, if you think about the experience as you just explained, you know, it's all those functions have to work together. Otherwise, you can't actually fix the experience.
It's not
HR. No, it's not HR.
Yeah. What are the metrics we should be looking at in terms of like, what does success look like? What are the things that we should be measuring?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously metrics is really important. You need to measure it, but it's hard. I mean, it's not, if you think about customers,
sales.
You know, it's also hard. You know, like to measure. You know, how does the experience? And there we have like, you know, net promoter scores and stuff like that. And I think the same has to be true with the employees. You know, that we look at engagement levels. You know, net promoter scores, but maybe on the employee side. And then at the end, you know, we want to obviously care about productivity, retention. And those measures. And so I think I see that now in companies who come from a very, very different approach. So KKR, like the private equity firm, who Pete Stavros is like one of the partners there. He cares about owner. So he came from a monetary aspect. So he thought, like, if we give ownership to the employees, if we give them stock options and so forth, the experience and productivity is increasing. Now, so they mainly mention engagement level and quit rates. Now, what is interesting there is, and that's very aligned with what I say in the book, is like, you know, money only brings you to a certain way. They then have, you know, they literally invest like in 30, 50 companies, put their money down to improve kind of engagement level and quit rates, and give them stock options. Now, only in half of them, it works. In half it didn't. So they went further and they're like, why? I mean, our theory was like, if I make you an owner, then you work like an owner. But that's not the whole story. So at the moment they're thinking about, they call it leadership empathy. So there needs to be something else.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's exactly what I talk about and what we just talked about. There is money, and maybe that's number, 3?
Yeah.
Or 4 or whatever it is, but there is other aspects that actually make us engaged and motivated. And now we just have to make sure that on those dimensions we do it, and then the metrics follow, where we like see engagement level go up, quit rates go down, and eventually productivity going up, innovation metrics and so on.
The stock options, in my experience, from like, it's been like artificial retention. So like, I've got a friend right now who works, actually I probably shouldn't say the name, but of the company, but he's like, I've got 3 months to go until these stock options vest, and I'm out.
Yeah.
So he's not staying there because he's excited.
Yeah.
He doesn't enjoy his job. He's literally, and he had to stay for like 4 years in order to get the X amount of stock options vested.
Yeah.
And the same thing with another friend.
So
it's like, in some cases, yes, it's, whereas others, it's like almost like another form of golden handcuffs.
Yeah. and that's exactly, I think, what the experience they have is like, you see immediately quit rates go down. But engagement levels don't go up at the same. Because it's exactly what you said.
It's artificial.
And that then goes back to your question about the metrics. What do we want to measure? Now, if it's just like you stay, I mean, that's one. But it's obviously not the whole story. We want really engagement, motivation, go up and measure that part. And I think that's the same with...
Sometimes that could be, surely, sorry to cut you off, surely sometimes that could be in the detriment of the business that person stays.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Some people, you actually want them to leave.
Yeah, and they're not going to leave because they're like, well, I'm going to stay another year to get, so probably...
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of where my behavioral economics and motivation piece comes in, where I think about like, money is just a small part. There are other ways that people are motivated, and we really need to double down on those. Those also make the big difference. Like if it's just money, first of all, that comes right out of the bottom line. Eats into the margin, and it's also relatively easy to copy. It leads to this race to the bottom or top, or whatever direction. Like, oh, you pay 5,000 more, I pay 5,000 more. But if it's about the experience, that is hard to do, where you actually figured it out, how to create an amazing, engaging experience and did the hard work, then you get this competitive or what I then call like the employee advantage. You actually get the advantage in the marketplace.
It's interesting because I was in that company for 10 years, and every year I'd get phone calls from the same competitors trying to get me to leave, and it would be 5K more, 10K more, sometimes even 20K more. And it was always, for me, I've built such strong relationships in that workplace, and obviously invested so much into it, that the idea of like, I'm going to start from scratch for an extra 5-10K, like this is earlier in my career, it just didn't make sense, right, to do that. And when I did leave later in my career, and it was significantly more, I went to that company, and within the first few days I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Like this amount of money has made no material impact to my life, but now I have all of those friends that I've built, the relationships, the work that I had done. I was like, what have I done? Like, why did I do this? And then after that, I started this company as well. So it's not, the grass is definitely not always greener, and it's not always worth it on the other side. And that's why I stayed at that company. It wasn't because of the money. I could have went somewhere else and made way more money to do that. But do you think, I don't know if you did any research about this, I haven't seen much data. Does it also depend on what stage of your career that you're in? So if you're later in your career, you could argue money is less important because you maybe, have paid off the mortgage, kids have left the house as well. Whereas earlier in your career, when you've just come out of university, money may be the more...
Absolutely. So I actually did a lot of research on kind of how we trade off. I mean, income versus, I call it meaning, just as a bucket kind of for the other parts. And you're absolutely right. There is this life cycle, like when you're at the beginning, and you need to take care of, you want to build a family or like build a house, like money / career opportunity. It's not just money, like people choose early on, like they want to have a certain career path. And I want to learn something new that they can, that helps them later. But later in life, and I don't think I really real much about my age, but when you're a little older and you look like this, it's like, money is like, I really now care about the impact. I chose to be in academia, so money was never that important to me. But yeah, other aspects become much more important. Yeah. And you saw that also, during the pandemic, where like people later in life, like, I'm out of here. Like,
it was an aha moment for so many people.
Why would I do this?
Because people actually had, what was interesting about that? Like, because it was the first time that people had time to think and reflect. So one of the advantages was that you're at home, you wasn't surrounded by the noise of the workplace and everything going on, that you actually had time to sit down and just reflect on life and be like, is this really what I want to do? Right. And because we were so busy before in the hustle and bustle of life and work, you just never had time to even reflect on that. And I had that same moment, and spoke to Shane and the team and said, I don't want to travel as much as I used to, because this has made me realize that I want to spend more time with Robin. I want to be present as a dad, and now I make sure that I'm at tennis practice, I'm at jiu-jitsu practice, and I wasn't doing that before. But it gave me the opportunity to reflect and do that.
And I think that's a really important part. Now, while there is this life cycle, like older or care a little bit about more and younger, but that was also always true. What I also sometimes find a little frustrating when I hear a phrase kind of kids these days.
Oh,
it refers kind of, kids these days are like they don't work as hard.
Did we always have that though? Does every generation say that?
I sometimes show in my classes a quote, which the quote something says like, kids these days, they don't respect whatever authorities and whatever. It's a quote from the Greek philosopher Socrates.
That's been going on since then.
The quote, kids these days, is as old as their kids.
So
what is true is today there are different opportunities. You can actually switch jobs. Careers look different.
It's easier to do that.
It's easier.
100%.
Back in the days, there was clear career path. You entered, whatever, UBS, the bank.
You just grew.
And you then grew within that organization.
You don't see that anymore.
You don't see
this sort of 20-year employed, what do they call it? The job for life.
Yeah, exactly. Those 100-year lives and 60-year careers, where people zigzag around. And it's not a bug. Back in the days where you had to fiddle around your resume that it looks linear.
Remember those days where you had to say it has to look like this, otherwise people are like, oh, why do you have this?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to do that anymore. In fact, it's a feature. Like, you had like this amazing experience somewhere else which does not look like linear at all. Turns out that's now a feature. And that now, going back to our expectations question we had at the beginning, how preferences changed, that's now changed. What do we expect? Because I want to learn something new. And I'm not going to stay
especially when people are working on like in the gig economy and working on like project-based stuff. It could be 3 months here, 2 months there, 6 months here. That's now seen as an advantage.
Absolutely. And leaders now have to adapt to that. And that phrase, which I often hear from executive kids these days, feels a little bit it's their fault. And no, it's not their fault. That's the world we operate in. It's like the world is like that, and you have to adapt to make sure
the new world of work and the ways of working.
Yes.
Yeah. Listen, I could talk to you forever. Before you go, what advice would you have for all of the HR leaders that are listening out there?
I'm at the moment, as you could have figured out, really obsessed about this, employees are the new customers. What can we learn from customer-centricity? How to think about customer/employee journeys, how to listen, how to take advice in, how to change functions as well, to make sure that we really improve that experience. And then having that conversations with leaders about, I often hear from CHROs, so how do I'm on board, how do I convince the CEO, the CFO, about this. And I tried to tell them, it's like, this is next. It was it was product centric, then it was customer centric. That was a shift. And not everybody is the Amazon. Everybody obviously says they care about customers. Not everybody is as customer centric as Amazon is. And now we have to do the switch for the employees, and that requires hard work and changes within the organization, giving up power, to a certain degree. Also giving up power for HR, which, changing kind of what you're responsible, who shares the responsibility to really excel in delivering that employee experience.
Amazing. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the show. And for where can people reach you if they want to reach out and say hi, and also grab a copy of the book?
Yeah, well, either on LinkedIn or then my webpage, stephanmeier.com, where there's a lot of resources. I also have a monthly newsletter about like human-centric future of work. I would love to hear from your listeners about like what they do to actually improve the employee experience, so that we can collectively learn to make the future of work better and human-centric.
And for everyone listening or wherever you're watching, all of those links will be in the description. There'll also be a link to grab a copy of the book, The Employee Advantage, so make sure you do that. Hope you win the next football game.
Yeah, yeah. Hope we're gonna win.
And
Thank you, Chris.
Good to see you.
Thanks.